If you look at Afghanistan where it is now, with people being given decades of stability and progress and experienced a life that they could have. I mean, I remember when we pulled out and the Taliban basically retook the country in a matter of weeks, there were messages primarily from women, but from all aspects of society saying, I have to go out in the backyard and I have to bury my instruments now because I'm not allowed to use those anymore. And it's heartbreaking. And I think people underestimate the amount of work that goes into building a lasting peace. Just because the violence and the fighting is stopped doesn't mean that you have the infrastructure in place to keep that country stable and successful in the future. And so that was some of what y'all were doing, is going in and helping to establish lasting peace so that in 10 years' time, we don't have to go back into Afghanistan because it's gotten so bad that, international intervention is required.
We actually call that track 2 and track 3 diplomacy. So track 1 is typically where we're going to have the actual world leaders and the diplomats sitting at the table, drafting up the peace agreement and signing it. Those tracks below it are when you're actually working directly with the people who might be on the ground preventing, or I would say spoiling, the peace process because they were left out of the room, or they're the ones who actually have to live with their enemies day by day. And so we go in there and we try to help foster and heal and actually make sure those peace processes are effective, because we are there and actually carrying out what that peace agreement was and kind of going into those communities that have been broken and have been hurt and finding ways for them to work together and rebuild their community together. And I think that's what's often forgotten about. Just because you sign something on a piece of paper doesn't make it happen. You got to have somebody who's there to help guide people day by day, help them learn how to live with their neighbors again after some atrocity has taken place.
Well, we're starting to have issues with that in America before the atrocities have taken place. Imagine trying to reconcile and rebuild after. We're already struggling with that in this country before it's even happened.
Yeah, I mean, we had government officials, high-level people on our side of the government, but also foreign government coming to us, for advice on how to handle things.
With everything that's happened, we still have had members of the Institute who are not employed, but are still being asked by the Department of Defense for advice because they are seen as experts in these fields. And so I think that speaks to the credibility of the Institute, also the credibility of our staff and the people that were there.
And so just to briefly summarize, just to make sure that I'm on the same page as y'all, the Institute has individual, independent contracts and work that you do with organizations within this country and around the world, but you also cooperate with various levels of the U.S. government to provide expertise and training. So it's kind of a multi-level, multi-solution peace-building program, kind of a one-stop shop for peace, which is something that we really should be prioritizing.
There are a lot of communities that they would rather work with us than the State Department, because we are not direct diplomats, but we still are close with the American government, and so we have that authority and legitimacy, but we also have the flexibility and the independence to be the voices and ears that these people need. I wanted to clarify that because it's been a question with a lot of stuff over the last couple of months with the Institute. We do not act as diplomats when we go in to do this work, which actually helps keep us trustworthy in a sense too.
Yeah, from my own personal experience growing up overseas, State Department's not always well liked, and having people coming in and saying, "Oh yeah, no, I want to help you. Yes, I am, technically with that, but I'm not with them." You can open so many doors that way.
Yeah, a lot of the independent contracting, that contracting that we do is working directly with those in those conflict zones that are helping us with these projects and programs. And then we feed that into these events and convenings, trainings that we have, and these dialogues and roundtables with high-level U.S. officials, like those in the Department of Defense, the State Department, and then foreign government as well, to be able to then feed into their decisions.
You mentioned working in conflict zones. So I know that one of the criticisms, or not even criticisms, one of the sources of one of the pieces of misinformation that was spread about the Institute was that you were working with people actively engaged in conflict, or you were funding terrorism, that sort of thing. But as a peace-building institute, you would kind of have to work with the people in conflict, would you not?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much said it. Some of the criticisms we have gotten is certain people that we have worked with in the past and some rumors of where they came from. But we were working directly with the people who were respected in a lot of communities and who had specific networks and connections that the United States governments had been relying on for decades. Even outside of just the Institute of Peace, that other agencies and organizations were also aware of these people and working with these people. So we're not doing anything behind the US government's back or under the table.
And we've got all of that recorded of who we worked with and things like that. And they fed into our projects that directly helped the U.S. government uncover some terrible things that were happening in these places by other actors.
You mentioned earlier on that there is a paper trail for all of this, that there is like an auditing process, there's a reporting process. So there's not really any way that any of this stuff was done under the table, as you said. All of this stuff was recorded and cataloged for people with the proper authorization to review it. So none of this stuff was being done secretly or maliciously or anything like that. They always had the ability to go back and be like, hey, that's a little suspicious. Let me take a look at what you actually did. That was always an option on the table that they could have done.
They just needed to ask.
Does the Institute have any domestic peace-building initiatives?
So while our mandate is asking us to focus on preventing conflicts abroad, we did have that focus on educating the American public on what we do. But also there were resources like an academy that was online and free for anybody to access from anywhere in the world, including the U.S., to be able to have information on how to resolve conflicts, like peace processes, negotiation. And so these were things that could be used and provided for our American people. There were also programs for teachers here in the U.S., like a program that we had where they could use materials that we developed for classrooms for their middle school groups and their high school groups. And so they were doing projects about peace and what's negative peace and positive peace and implementing those. And that was really exciting to see as well happen here in the U.S. across all different states.
I also think of all the trainings that we do, even at the Institute with religious leaders in the U.S., it's not just diplomats who are getting ready to go abroad. But there are American citizens who are getting these trainings. I know that there are plans to work with military chaplains over at the Department of Defense, as well as to equip them for their work abroad. So even though our mandate is focused internationally, we still work closely with American citizens because they are our taxpayers. It's their institute too, so we treat it as such.
Right. And I also don't want to emphasize this too much because it's not really the point, but our work does help to keep from instability from happening in countries. And then therefore, if we're talking about not wanting worse situations, if we're talking about managing a immigration crisis or refugee crisis, and we don't want that to spill over and become overwhelming, this work helps prevent that from even happening in the first place.
What has the Institute either being shut down now, not being at full strength, being from an international level, America now being seen not as a stabilizing factor, but as an actively destabilizing factor? What are some of the things that have been lost with the Institute being targeted and shut down like this?
Well, I would say for our foreign counterparts, those that we worked with in other countries, their direct safety has been at risk. And I think it would prompt them to have second guesses or questions about working with the U.S. in the future. I think the fact that the headquarters staff was fired before the people in our abroad offices made it to where they couldn't contact anybody for safety reasons. Also, identifying information was put out for some of the people that we worked with that could be directly targeted and at risk. I think they would have second thoughts before wanting to work with us and to rebuild. That, again, is always much more difficult than it is to quickly tear something down, right? I think that's been a big loss.
I worry about the damage to our reputational lot, even as peace builders. Because if we do things like abandon our overseas partners at the drop of a hat, even though it wasn't our direct fault, that's not going to help the U.S. That is going to continue this narrative that we often see abroad, that the U.S. is an untrustworthy partner. So we should never engage with them at all or even try to do peace work with them because they're just going to pull out again. And I think of all of the stuff that has been stopped because of the cuts across the board. When the US is not present anymore in those situations, guess who's moving into those situations? It's been China, it's been our adversaries. And so if you want to protect US interest, we're actually kind of harming them by no longer being present. What does our promise mean? What does our word even mean? And I also worry about, where are we? What happened to our American values and Christian values? What does loving my neighbor, as I see on your shirt, really look like? And that has been a big part of our American values. What does that look like when we just step back? It's like we lose a little part of ourselves. And I'm always reminded of Matthew 25. Whatever you do to the least of these, you do unto me. And if we're going to claim to be a Christian nation, or there are people here who want us to be a Christian nation, we should live by those Christian values and actually live them out.